Hello everyone, and welcome to session 4 of the Ukraine Crisis webinar series. My name is Laye Butaki, and I'm the Director of Communication and Outreach for Academia 2063. First of all, Happy New Year. Happy New Year to all of you. And we are so happy to have you here with us. We hope and we pray that 2023 is going to be a highly productive and prosperous year for all of our friends and partners. For all the friends, partners, and supporters of Academia 2063, we wish you and family the very best. So today's session 4 of our Ukraine Crisis webinar series is themed The Ukraine Crisis in African Economies with Sector Disruptions, Exposure, Contagion, and Effects on Income and Food Security. As always, we are providing simultaneous interpretation in English and French. Should you need interpretation, please click the globe icon on your screen and choose the language track you need. We are also streaming on our YouTube channel, Academia 2063. And please go to the chat and let us know your name, your organization or affiliation. Let us know where you're joining us from and what your expectations are of this session. We will be monitoring the Q&A chat. Please direct all your questions and observations to the Q&A if you want them to be discussed on the floor. Also, during the Q&A segment of this session, you will have the possibility to speak if you so desire. So if at any point you wish to take the floor, kindly raise your hand and you will be allowed to speak. Now let's welcome today's moderator. He is the Regional Food Markets Advisor at the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO. Please welcome our moderator, Mr. Watipaso Mkandawire.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good afternoon and Happy New Year from London, from a wet, cold London. It's great to join everyone in these webinars. As I've already been introduced, my name is Watipaso Mkandawire. I work for the Pan-African Department of FCDO in London as a Regional Food Trade Advisor, currently working as a lead on promoting intra-regional food trade through our support to countries in sub-Saharan Africa. We work with the private sector to try to see how we can support the private sector, as well as work with the various stakeholders to bring about policy predictability in the food trade arena. I would like to thank Academia 2063 for giving me this opportunity to moderate this session, and the first one in 2023. Which we'll be talking about Ukraine crisis and African economies, looking at which sector disruptions, exposure, contagion, and effects, especially on income and food security. We have a distinguished speaker today, Lisa Matesau, who will be looking at this topic in terms of looking at the overall effects of the disruptions in the wheat sector, as well as providing an overview of the African countries' exposure to global wheat trade. It should be an interesting presentation. She has 20 minutes to share with us her thoughts and some of the findings, and probably also look at where we're going from here in view of what has happened following the Ukraine-Russia crisis. So without much ado, I would like to welcome Lisa, and as we've been told, we can put our questions and comments in the Q&A so that you can be recognized when it comes to the Q&A session. So over to you, Lisa. We look forward to listening to your words of wisdom.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Watipaso. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are joining. So my name is Lisa Sal, and I work for Academia 2063 as a Senior Associate Scientist in the Department of Capacity and Deployment. And it's with a great pleasure today that I'm going to present the finding of the team on Ukraine crisis, focusing on wheat sector disruption. So we will successively talk about the exposure, the contagion, and also the different effect impact on income and food security. During the presentation, I will discuss the following main points. First, starting with the introduction, where I will give an overview of the global wheat market, and then I will discuss the exposure and vulnerability of African countries to see how far those countries are exposed. Finally, I will present briefly the different simulation scenarios that we have constructed, and then we will look at the different impact on household income and also on food security through the food inflation and also on the food consumption. And at the end, I will provide some policy implication from the results. And out of introduction, as we all know, the Russia-Ukraine conflict have raised several concerns about global trade in grain, and this particularly because Russia and Ukraine are part of the major exporters of wheat and other food staples over the world. Considering African countries and wheat has a relatively small place in the agricultural sectors, and our estimate have shown that around 60% of African countries mainly are importing wheat directly from these two countries, Russia and Ukraine. Now, in this graph, we can see the weekly wheat export price from the US market from the period 2005 to 2022. And what we see here is the prices of wheat has increased by more than 30% between February, where the crisis actually started, and May 2022. But further, on the week of May 2022, we see that the prices has increased and reached an all-time high record of $560 per ton. And this happened when India, which had greatly expanded shipment in the second quarter, helping to make up for lost export from Ukraine, has imposed an embargo on wheat exports in early May. And in the third quarter, prices dropped in part because of the commercial export from Ukraine crisis seaports, which has basically resumed. And the average prices decreases between May and August. More recently, the prices jumped because this can be most likely due to the ending stocks of wheat globally in the year 2022. So the main objective of this study was first to analyze the exposure and the vulnerability of African countries. And in the second aspect, we analyzed the effect on some selected African countries, the effect on growth incomes, on food price inflation, and also on the level of food consumption. So as I said, the analysis focused on some selected countries, which are Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, and Tanzania. We have also Ghana, Mozambique, Malawi, and Uganda. So two groups have been defined. In the first one, households were disaggregated into urban and rural. And in the second group of countries, we were able to disaggregate them into urban, rural farm, and rural non-farm household. Regarding the exposure and vulnerability to wheat market disruption, we analyze two types of things. The first one is a direct exposure, which help us measure how African countries are exposed directly to the import from Ukraine and Russia. And what we see here we use the dependency ratio of wheat imports from these two countries to see how far they are exposed. And the main findings are first that most of African countries rely on imports to satisfy their domestic needs for wheat. And in terms of dependency, 10 African countries are highly exposed to wheat imports from Ukraine and Russia. And this is measured by their import dependency ratio. And as we can see, countries in red like Egypt, like Benin, and also Congo are the most exposed. Another group of 10 countries highlighted here in light green have considerable exposure with an import dependency between 25 and 50%. And the last group of countries, around 14 countries, have a relatively average exposure, which is below 25%. But beyond this direct exposure, we can have what we call the indirect exposure that we have measured here as using the import penetration ratio, which is the ratio of the import to the domestic consumption. And and an interesting result we have observed here is many African countries, around 23, import more wheat than what they need for their domestic consumption. And this brings another issues related to the recontamination. And the main thing is the countries do not have to be trading directly with Ukraine and Russia to be engaged in the global trade, to be exposed to the effect of the war. So countries can be exposed to the crisis, not through their involvement in the global market, but also they can be exposed through re-exportation and export from their neighbors. Now, when we look at the trade flows between the countries that are most likely re-exporting, we can see here that many African countries re-export wheat to their neighbors. And this is the main cause of their indirect exposure to the global market shops. And this network is particularly dense in West Africa, where, for example, we can see that some countries like Burkina Faso are exposed not only because they are trading directly with Ukraine and Russia, but through export from Senegal and also and Cote d'Ivoire, who are the direct exposed countries. In terms of simulation to analyze the effect on income and food security, we define two main scenarios based on changes in international wheat price. And these prices were made available by the World Bank commodity price data. So we had to estimate before and after the starting of the crisis and compare them to basically analyze the effects on the different countries. In the first scenario, the baseline scenario, we assume that there are no major changes and countries are following their trajectories in the absence of the crisis. And to do so, we use the price forecasted for the year 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024, made in October 2021 before the crisis started. For the Ukraine scenarios, we consider as disruption changes in global international wheat price observed in April 2022 after the crisis started. Now, from these two scenarios, here is the global picture of the variation of wheat price, and global wheat prices are expected to jump by more than 40% in 2022, but also prices have started to decrease in 2023 and in 2024. But this is not allowing also the price to recover and to return to the value in the pre-war period. With these two scenarios, we try to compare the effects on household income. So for the household income, the main results indicate that we have globally a negative income effect among both urban and rural households. And for this first group of countries, we see a reduction in gross income, and this is weaker in Nigeria and kind of stronger for Senegalese household. Another interesting result also is the fact that the richest households are the most affected. And in the graph presented here, we can see the results presented for the different quintile for each group of household. And income among the top two quintile, we can see here in blue and yellow, tend to decline more in Kenya, but also in rural Senegal and Tanzania. In contrast, in Nigeria, urban household in the second richest group, meaning the first quintile, tend to earn a higher share of income from activities in the cereal processing sector. For the second group of countries, we see that the lowest income is observed among rural non-farm and urban household in Ghana, but also we can have a lower effect for Uganda in Uganda, and the strongest income effect are observed here in Mozambique, and this both in urban and in rural areas. And overall, the effect of rising global wheat prices can be assimilated to what we call a tax on incomes, and which we can observe through the generalized decrease in incomes for almost all group of households. Another important point that may explain the differences of impact between household and countries is the size of wheat sector industries in the different economies, and also the share of wheat products in household expenditures. But in any case, for both groups, the effects on household income hold through 2024, and it tends to increase in all countries with the fact that wheat prices is still high, and and producers and consumers need to adjust their behaviors with the change in the global market. And income starts to recover only in Malawi and Uganda in 2024. Now, looking at the effect on food inflation, high wheat prices will likely erode the purchasing power of the poorest and contribute to food price inflation. And still in the first group, prices remain stable at high level in 2024 in Kenya, while it continued to rise in Senegal and also in Nigeria. For the case of Tanzania, Tanzania is the only country in this group who see the food prices decreasing in the last year, 2024. For the second group of countries, Ghana, Malawi, and Uganda also show an increase in food prices for the lower income household in rural area. And Mozambique, as Tanzania in the first group, are the only two countries where prices tend to fall back to their pre-war level in 2024. For the last point on food consumption, also with the combined effect of food price inflation and the decrease in income, we will likely have some impact on food consumption. And our simulation showed that Kenyan household has the highest drop in food consumption, which is around 1.5%. And Nigeria is a country from the group who is showing the lowest decline in food consumption level. And rural households in Senegal are facing a relatively stronger decline compared to other group of households. For the last group of country, a strong decline is expected in Ghana and Mozambique, and food consumption level also are shown to recover more by 2024 in rural area in Mozambique, but also in Malawi compared to urban areas. So these are basically the main finding, and from this finding, we try to identify some policy implication from the different point. And first, regarding the exposure and vulnerability, as we discussed, we have around 40 African countries that are directly depending from Ukraine and Russia on wheat. And from this dependency, we think that it's urgent. We need some urgent measures to reduce the effect on consumer prices for wheat products. And also, it is very important to anticipate some transmission to prices of local staples, because if prices raise and consumers may gradually turn to other local staple foods as substitute to overcome the prices. And in terms of re-exportation and regional contagion, since the countries are interrelated, we think that neighboring countries need really to coordinate their responses to the crisis and to allow the trade between the different countries. And the more borders remain open, the wider the shocks can be spread. That will allow to absorb the global shock over the year. And finally, regarding income, inflation, and food security, as the rises in wheat prices may be assimilated to a tax on incomes, and also the size of the wheat processing industries may have an explanation. We think that lower income households need to be protected from these inflationary pressures from global market, and to help them overcome the shock, to help them also to be able to afford for the food available. So I'm going to stop here, and thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to your questions, comments, and contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for the presentation, and right on time. You've remained within your allocated 20 minutes. Thank you for that. That will give us time and opportunities for people to present their questions. I think I'll just summarize a couple of points which are critical, which might help the discussion. In your presentation, you spoke about issues of exposure and vulnerability of African countries to the crisis, and you used a couple of simulations to try to identify the impact on income prices in the African countries, in the selected African countries, which you highlighted. But initially, you did find out that there were 60% of the countries were dependent on imports from Ukraine and Russia. But you also presented a situation where prices had gone up between February and May to a high level of $560 per metric ton. But these quickly went down around August in the third quarter to $380 per ton. In terms of some of the measures that you use to identify the effects, you looked at issues like the dependency ratio, where you're looking at import dependency of the countries. You also looked at the indirect exposure, which led to, you found out there was quite a significant amount of contamination, where 23 countries were not directly trading with Russia and Ukraine, but they were affected because of the re-exportation. In other words, 23 countries import more than they consume, and then they re-export that. And you gave us indication of where those re-exports taking place. And you have come up at the end with some of the policy issues, which is how do countries work on reducing the impact on all the wheat prices themselves as a result of what has happened. You've looked at whether countries understand and what are they going to do regarding the transmission mechanism on the local staples. And the third area, you've also talked about the, especially arising from the contamination, the issue of how do countries coordinate in terms of their response to ensure that as a region or as a continent, some of those impacts are minimized because of the collaboration response. These are quite vital issues. I think one of the issues that maybe you may want to comment later is, since these studies were done around May, June, July, around that time, what has transpired since then? In part of the conclusions or some of the assumptions was that the prices will increase by almost 40% of wheat, but this fell around August. Where are we at the moment? Are those projections going that way? Is it indeed true that some of the countries will not only get the effects minimized starting 2024? Is 2023 looking the same or different from the conclusions that you had reached? These are some of the issues that, as we start discussing, you may want to comment on. But I'd like to open the floor if there are questions and comments. And if I don't see any comments, then I might ask you to respond on my few comments that I have made. But any questions from the floor? Do we have any questions in the Q&A, or anyone wants to raise their hand and contribute?
No questions yet. Perhaps you can go ahead and comment on the moderator's observations, and we'll come back to the questions soon.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Watipaso, for the comments. Yes, it is true that in the simulation presented here in this study, it was in the initial phase of the Ukraine crisis, where only the projection made right after the conflict started has been used. And in April 2022, we estimated that wheat prices will be increasing by around 40%. In the recent estimates done on October 2022, we have the same trend actually, but the amplitude is quite smaller, but the global impact is not changing. Prices are still increasing compared to what should have been observed without the Ukraine crisis, and it's still the same thing holds. We tried also to have the estimation for the latest countries, and for this latest group, we consider the actual value estimated around November 2022 by the World Bank, and actually the same scenario is keep happening. The amplitude is quite smaller, but the trend is similar.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the floor?
There is a hand from Julie Collins.
Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Julie. Thank you, Lisa, for the presentation. It was very interesting. And I joined a little bit late, so I apologize if my question is something that was covered in the presentation, but I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the transmission of higher wheat prices to local staples. Do we know which staples are affected? Do we know which are affected more than others? If you could just say a little bit more about what if work has been done maybe in other work streams under the Ukraine project. Yes, over to you. Thanks, Lisa.
All right, thank you, Julie, for the question. Regarding the transmission into local prices, I think there is a work stream from Mr. Greenwell, who is working on the transmission, on the local transmission, but this has not been taken into consideration in this study. What I can say is with the increase in wheat prices and the consumption habits, a household will likely turn to the most accessible local staple food available in their countries, and this may be very different from one country to another depending on what is available and also depending on what are their preferences. So I'm not sure about for the specific local staples considered, but I know that there is a work stream who is interested in this point. Maybe also they can give their point if some specific works have been done. I can see Kerval is online.
That would be great if he commented on that, if he's online. Has he been unmuted so that he can comment? Or he doesn't have anything to comment on it?
All right, no problem.
Well, yes, he's been unmuted.
Mr. Macha, please go ahead.
Hey. Lisa, thanks very much for the nice presentation. Can you just come in again with the question? I think the question was on local. Local price transmission.
Yes. The question was on local price transmission. The work stream working on local price transmission for the Ukraine crisis. I'm not sure if it is your team or it's another one, but I think that there was some analysis trying to see how far the shocks in global market are transmitted to local markets, right?
Oh, all right. Okay. Yes. So that's true. We're working on that. I'm not sure whether the response I'm going to give satisfies the question. I'm not very sure whether I got the initial question well, but yes, in the studies that we're having, we're undertaking, it's clear that regardless of whether a country trades directly with the Ukraine or Russia or some of those countries, you still find that the local prices are kind of affected. So while the initial expectation might be that, okay, probably it's going to be wheat, which is going to be affected because Russia and Ukraine are exporters of that, and maybe also the fertilizers, etc. You actually find that, okay, there are also impacts on other markets, like say sugar, as well as some other local oils. So I think part of that is to do with issues of substitution effects at the country level. So a country might not necessarily be entangled with Russia directly in terms of international trade, but to the extent that Russia, what is happening in Russia impacts on other trading partners of that country, the country also starts experiencing some of those effects. But the details of each of those, I think it's difficult to just generalize them. They vary from one country to another. Over to you.
Maybe before you disappear, Greenwell, I think part of the question, if I remember very well, was to do with what are those staples that a substitution could have occurred? Are there any specific staples in specific countries that you've seen the trend that this is occurring or has or might occur?
So you find that a number of African countries produce their own maize. It's a maize staple food. You don't expect it to just be directly affected by what is happening in Russia. We don't import directly from them, but you start seeing that there is some kind of movements which, although you might not establish causation, but the correlations are kind of almost persuasive enough for you to start attributing those trends to what is happening in Russia, just as an example.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We also had some research from, I think Paul Guthiga is here, on transmission to local markets. Paul, if you wish to comment, your mic is open. Back to you, moderator. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Usman Badian, who is with us as well.
Welcome, Dr. Badian, and I'm glad that you could join and you could clarify on some of the issues once questions come. And we hope you'll be able to participate in the later times. Anyone else would like to comment on the presentation? I don't see anything in the chat. Is there any new hands? One of the things that maybe Lisa, you could comment on is that you did indicate that you see the trend following the pattern based on the simulation. The current information that we're looking at is that maybe the world wheat output is going up, with countries like Turkey increasing production, diverting some of the wheat, whether it's wheat or wheat flour, where they've lost the Iraqi market. Perhaps they're looking at African countries. That growth in terms of the output, no reduction, will that continue affecting the price trend and how you've what you outlined earlier on, or because there's that growth? And I'm sure in African countries there's growth in production as well. Are you working as a continuation from this study? I know because we were involved in this study. So what else is there, looking at what has been predicted and what is happening in the larger global market at the moment in wheat production and wheat flour itself?
Okay, what I can say here is for sure the trend that is observed in other countries that are main exporters of wheat can basically influence the international price. One example I can say is when India, which was helping to in the wheat supply in the world market, imposed some restrictions. We see that the prices basically increase highly in May 2022. And when the seaport was open, also prices decreased. So we are expecting that if countries like Turkey or like India increase their production, this will likely affect the international price of wheat. But I'm not really confident for the wheat production in Africa because, for example, in Africa, in terms of production, we see that around 60% of the production is of wheat is produced by North African countries, mainly Egypt, and also we can see in Sub-Saharan Africa, Ethiopia is also producing a lot of wheat. But on the other side, several other challenges are here, which are likely due to the, for example, the relative, the low level of input that is considered, but we can have also the rain fade and some climatic shocks that can impact the production. So as we were mainly interested by the impact of this war directly from Russia and Ukraine, we didn't take into consideration the link between other countries, but mainly from the two warring countries. That's what I can comment on this one. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I see that we have questions in the chat, and maybe Dr. Badana, you would like to respond on the same before I go to the questions on the chat?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Watipaso and colleagues joining us here for this webinar today. I'm on the road, so that's why I couldn't put my camera. But just to that question that you asked about a change in supply conditions in some countries, this may have some impact on prices, but at the end of the day, it is really the last supply to the market and the cost of supplying the markets that are going to be determining the prices which people are going to be importing. So unless you have significant amounts of additional supplies outside of Africa or among African countries, in the case of an individual country, the prices may still be quite in a very tight situation. So we did some projections across Africa, in North Africa, and in Southern Africa. There was some uptick in outputs in most countries. We will be publishing that brief very soon. I think it is in the final stages of copy editing. But the increase in supply across Africa is particularly in Northern African countries and Southern African countries that do produce wheat has not been that big in order to influence prices that much. And that is not a surprise because the season was already underway when this price surges started. So it wasn't enough time to respond to that in most countries. That may change in the next season, probably due to government efforts and perhaps farmers reacting to higher prices for that. So we'll have to keep an eye on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that clarification. I think it helps us to look at the perspective from when in the long term, when you're looking at resilience and looking at the broader picture in terms of what happens after the Ukraine-Russia crisis. Where should countries be looking at in terms of their own policy response or strategy in terms of usage of wheat? So there is a question in the chat. This is from Kodia Saul. The question is why in Uganda the food price is increasing, because in your presentation you mentioned that this country is the only country where the price is increasing, considering the group in which you looked at the countries, I guess. I don't know whether you understand the question. Cody, are you here? Would you want to clarify your question? Unless, Lisa, did you understand the question? Why are food prices increasing in Uganda? But you mentioned in your presentation, like a different story, that this country is the only country where price is increasing, something like that, if I get it correctly. Is Kodia online? Maybe you can clarify the question.
Mr. Moderator,
Yes.
while waiting, I see that a few people have dropped questions in the chat.
Okay.
In the general chat, there is one observation from Mohamed Abaka. It's in French. Let me translate. The repercussions on countries importing wheat from Russia or Ukraine have pushed EU member states to take strong political measures, especially in terms of substitute products. These include investments to develop cassava and cassava flour, for example, and equally investments in the revival of wheat production sites in Africa, such as in Cameroon, where the state will mobilize more than 5 billion TFA to revive wheat production areas. In Gabon and Congo, the governments of these two countries have launched agricultural production zones in order to produce corn and especially cassava to face or to prevent this kind of crisis in years to come. So the question is, in view of these initiatives and measures and these political measures, can we then say that the Russia-Ukraine war has, engendered something positive that has led African countries to invest in substitution plans? That's from Mohamed Abaka.
Okay.
Lisa, you want to have a go on that question?
Yes, I will start with the question of Mrs. Hoja So. I think in the presentation we show that with the increase of global wheat prices, the contribution in the food price inflation is prices are increasing in Uganda. But not Uganda, but Tanzania is the only countries where we can see that in 2024, the food price inflation is decreasing. So it's not Uganda, but it's Tanzania. Now, regarding the comments of Mr. Mohammed, let me open it again. I think that if wheat prices are increasing in the country and also households have the possibility to consider other staple food, it's a kind of adaptation plan they are using with their income available. So it may be a good strategy to enhance the use of local produce staple food. And I think also it's a good strategy to promote what is locally produced, and this should be aligned with the food consumption habit of local economies. But beyond the crisis, this is a kind of policy that needs to be enhanced so that countries may consume what they produce and limit their vulnerability to international shocks. That's my main comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. For those who are able to access the chat, some of the clarification on some of the questions, like the question on product substitution, there is a brief and a link that has been provided. So you may want to ensure that you have that link so that you can read more regarding what has happened regarding substitution. Kodia, I think your question has been responded that it's not Uganda, it's actually in the simulation, it was Tanzania where that situation was occurring. I don't know if I've missed any question. Kodia, you want to come in as well? You want to come in again? No,
yeah.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
No, I see in the comment that she wanted to know what explained the food price increasing in Uganda, right?
Okay, I see. Yes, I want to know the fact that you explain why in Uganda the food price is increasing.
Yeah, I think this is a direct transmission channel. If prices are increasing in the global market and we are importing, this is likely to be transmitted in the local market. And also depending on the household expenditure of wheat, this will have an impact on food price. So the price increase observed in the global market is transmitted to the food price in the local market. As far as Ugandan household are consuming wheat, which is mainly imported from the global market.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any more questions? Have I missed anything in the chat? Okay, there's a hand from Muhammad Dankari. Go ahead, please. Could you unmute him?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Lisa, for the great presentation. I have a question related to the stock that the countries constitute in terms of for maize commodities. So during your presentation, you mentioned that some countries import, not just to re-export, but also they constitute some stock reserve. So I would like to know if during your analysis in terms of food security and also the impact on food prices, if you observe that countries that constitute this stock are the ones that are less affected in terms of food insecurity increase, and also even in terms of food price increase. Did you try to draw this type of observation from the analysis? Thank you.
Before you come in, there's another question from Dave Watson. I recognize you, Dave. Please go ahead so that we can take the questions together.
Yeah, no, it's being cheeky, Watty, I'm afraid. I mean, I've been very close to this work, so that I don't have any explicit kind of questions remaining about the presentation, but I am very interested to see whether you and other academics think that we're going to get a similar situation in 2023. Will this continue in 2023? And if it's going to be different, and I'm not asking you to really kind of crystal ball, but any kind of broad, ballpark, I guess, directional kind of feedback would be really useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Over to you, Lisa.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Dankari. Regarding the question on stock constitute for, I guess it is for wheat, right? I hear something like maize, but maybe you are referring to it, right? So for the issue of stocks, I know that when we were analyzing the indirect exposure, we consider the import penetration ratio, which basically compare the imports to the domestic supply. And in terms of domestic supply, it includes the production, but also what we are importing minus what is exported over the world, and also what is stocked. But beyond this this analysis, we didn't really compare who is stocking, because most of countries are not producing wheat overall, and they are importing for their consumption. And at least if they are not, if they are importing not for their consumption, they are likely to export it to their neighbor countries. So basically, we didn't look at really the the relation between countries stocking wheat and countries not stocking, as they are almost all increasing or importing for their consumption. Over to you. Now for the second question of Dave, if we are expecting the similar situation in 2023, I think this will depend mainly on the trend observed in the global market. But as of now, prices hasn't recovered to their pre-war level. So it means that even if prices are still going back to their level, we can have this kind of impacts to a lower extent. So depending on what is observed and how things are changing, we can expect to have a lower effect, but still the effect will be positive, as prices are still high and they are projected to be high for a given period of time for the next year. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that response. We have 4 minutes to end our session. So I would like to try to give Lisa to say her final words in terms of not only the presentation, but the bigger picture, to send us home all smiling in terms of looking at the future, and also in terms of how she looks at the whole perspective of the wheat industry in Africa. So you have less than 5 minutes now, about 3 minutes to give us your concluding remarks.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Watipa. So what I can say is wheat was not really the leading staple crop in sub-Saharan Africa mainly, but it's becoming an important food crops because of the growth of the population, and also because of the urbanization and change in food preferences. So it's becoming a key staple food in Africa. And now to limit the vulnerability or the dependency on imports, and to overcome also challenges that we are observed in the wheat sector, countries need to take action to see what are the main policy options available, whether it is in terms of substitution or in terms of investment in the sector to increase the production. So we need to be aware of the different options available and take actions before another crisis or the crisis of Ukraine still continue to hit African countries. And I would like also to thank everybody for the participation, for the question and comments, and yeah, wish you a happy new year ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before I pass it on to Dr. Butake, I would like also as a moderator to say I enjoyed this presentation. Very interesting issues that came out in the discussions, and thank you to the participants for the questions. It's always good to be interactive. Time has been short. Unfortunately, not everyone could speak, but I think this is very useful information that you have shared. I would like to encourage all the participants who have not done that to go to the website of Academia 2063, download these briefs and read for themselves. I think it's important that even our governments and etc. are able to understand what was coming out of the study. I think it will give them some ideas in terms of what is really happening in these value chains. And maybe that contagion is happening in other value chains as well, and how do we coordinate as regional blocks or as neighboring countries to be able to not only lessen the impact on what has transpired, but as well as plan for the future growth of those affected value chains for the growth of incomes and jobs for the people in the respective countries. So let me end by calling on Dr. Butake to close us out. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Mkandawire, for agreeing to moderate our first session of 2023. We really appreciate your contributions to this conversation. And of course, thank you to our speaker, Ms. Lisa Matisal, Senior Associate Scientist at Academia 2063. Thank you for that presentation. So we're done with session 4 of the Academia 2063 Ukraine Crisis webinar series. Please join us same time next week for session 5, featuring Dr. Greenwald Machaya, where we'll be discussing the importance of food crop prediction in times of crisis with a focus on wheat, on the case of wheat in South Africa. Please check the links in the chat. You can visit our slide share to access the PowerPoints that have been presented during this Academia 2063 Ukraine Crisis webinar series. And in the chat, you can equally find the link to our Ukraine Crisis portal where you can access all the briefs published to this day. It's been a pleasure having you here with us today, and we hope to see you next week, 1 p.m. GMT. Thank you all. Happy New Year again. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.